y'all. Joel Buddy Bob, the board guy. Just doing a little reading. I might do a coloring video later, might not. Or maybe I'll color in this video. We'll see how it goes. Bruce was still thinking about the girl as the evening drew to a close, and he headed out of Arkham's doors to get into Alfred's waiting car. "How was it today?" Alfred asked. Bruce cast his guardian a dry look through the rear-view mirror. "Had the best time," he replied. "I highly recommend it." Alfred frowned at him. "Where do you inherit all this sarcasm from, Master Wayne?" "I don't know." Bruce leaned forward and hung an arm over the side of Alfred's seat. "Maybe it's from you." "Me? Sarcastic?" Alfred sniffed, the barest hint of a smile appearing on his lips. "It's as if you think I'm British." Despite the long day, Bruce couldn't help but grin at the report. He watched the dead limbs of trees blur past the window. The girl's face lingered in his thoughts, and when he let himself dwell too long, he could see her eyes flashing by at rhythmic intervals between the trunks, darker than night. A few minutes later, they pulled up to the training gym where Bruce spent most of his evenings. Bruce took a deep breath as he got out of the car, pulled open the gym door, and stepped inside. He needed a good, clean workout to clean his head, to shake the girl from his thoughts. The gym was an exclusive club where the coach, Edward Chang, an Olympic gold medalist in boxing and wrestling, only accepted students to train on a case-by-case basis. Bruce's gaze swept across the massive unbroken space, ending at the ceiling, which yawned a good 2 stories over his head. Blue mats were set up in various configurations all around the floor, and an octagon ring lay in the center, where official spars happened between Bruce's coach and his students. There were dozens of stations with weights and jump ropes, punching bags, and padded gear. Multiple rock climbing walls. At one far corner, there was even a swimming pool with 8 lanes. He went to the locker room and changed quickly, wrapping each of his hands in white gauze and dusting them with powder. Then took a pair of slim aviator goggles from his locker and pulled them on. The facilities were impressive, but what made the gym so expensive was the technology behind these goggles. With them over his eyes, Bruce could now see labels, mats, and ring and pull hovering over each area of the room. A central panel showed him a carousel of rotating landscapes he could set himself in while he trained. Bruce scrolled through them until he found his preferred setting. He reached out in midair to tap the option, and the world around him darkened into blackness. In a flash, it reset and found himself standing on the edge of a tower that disappeared into a bank of sunset clouds, staring out at a sea of glittering skyscrapers, all connected to each other with cables in such a way that he could run between them. Stairwells curved around the outside of each building's spirals. Overhead, overhead hung a virtual night sky. When he looked down, the height seemed so realistic he felt his head spin. The skyscrapers and obstacles all matched up with the layout of the gym itself. The mat formations and the octagon fighting ring and so on. The virtual stairwell syncing up with real physical step like mats laid out in circles. Bruce could select a mode on his landscape too. If he wanted to run between the skyscrapers and up and down the stairwells, then the cables and stairwells would be highlighted, turning bright white to make it easy for him to see. If he wanted to scale the sides of the buildings, each foothold along the sides of the buildings would be highlighted instead, all matching up with the rock climbing walls. Bruce chose the option to highlight the cables in the stairwells. They lit up in white, startling against the sunset scene. He stretched in relief, ready to shed the image of Arkham's dark halls from his mind and let himself stare down the dazzling side of the skyscraper. Then he jumped. He landed on a cable that ran between him and the nearest skyscraper. Instantly he began to run it, his balance unwavering, footing accurate from years of practice. When he reached the end, he took a flying leap to grab onto the bars of the building's outer stairwell. In real life, he hooked onto the metal monkey bars hanging over a series of blue mats, and his wrapped hands sent up a cloud of white dust. Bruce pulled himself in a single motion, his arm and back muscles wound tight, then rolled into the stairwell and continued running. Up a stairwell, then a flying leap, then another cable line. Sweat beaded his brow. With each passing minute, the warm-up exercise calmed him, and he could concentrate on nothing other than the steady pounding of his heart. Bruce! Bruce paused the simulation, then pulled his goggles up to see Coach Chang emerge from his office down the back hall to wave at him. Bruce smiled. Coach! The man nodded at the greeting. His hair was shaved short on the sides, tapering into a faux hawk on top. And then he folded his arms. His muscles bulged. His ears were scarred, hinting at his wrestling past. Nice work on those runs. Bruce was about to respond when a second figure followed Coach out onto the gym floor, Richard. Richard forced a smile. Hey, Bruce, he said, flexing his wrists. Richard told me he'll be out of town the night he usually trains. I hope you didn't mind that I have him here tonight. The pair of you can partner up like you used to. Like you used to. It had been years since he and Richard had wrestled together as friends. So much for a relaxing workout session, Bruce thought. Richard nodded, like old times. Bruce heard the note of exaggeration in his voice, the sarcasm. Their coach seemed oblivious to the tension between them as he dropped a bunch of equipment on the floor. Then he glanced down at his phone. Warm up a little, loosen yourselves up. We'll get started on a routine in a bit. He held his phone up to his ear. and stepped away, leaving them alone in a room. They moved to a sparring mat where Richard started circling Bruce. Heard you left the benefit early, Richard said. Did I really bother you that much? I just needed to clear my head. Bruce searched for an opening, his eyes fixed on the other boy. Richard let out a humorless chuckle. Please, you think I don't know you well enough to tell when you're lying? Bruce flexed his hands open and closed. He remembered circling Richard around the same space when they were young, and they'd laugh and throw challenges at each other. How different it felt back then. If you'd said that years ago, I'd have believed you, he replied. Not my fault we stopped hanging out. Then why? Bruce scowled. Was it something I did? Maybe someone's head got too big for his brain. Bruce could feel his temper rising. Why? Because I stopped letting you cheat off me all the time? Because you couldn't use me anymore? Don't flatter yourself. So that was it, Bruce thought. Richard wanted a fight, was itching for one. He narrowed his eyes as he saw Richard shift into an offensive stance and pulled his goggles back on, both of them connected to the same channel. And the ring around them transformed into a helicopter pad on a skyscraper's rooftop. Richard lunged, one bandaged fist aimed at his head. Bruce brought his shoulders up instinctively. The blow struck his upper arm, and he immediately countered. Bruce circled his opponent, holding back, waiting for him to attack. Again, defense first. Another lunge, another exchange of blows. Bruce had always been lighter on his feet, and he dodged Richard's attack. But he could tell that Richard had been practicing. Well, he wasn't the only one who had changed. 1, 2 hits. Richard barely managed to block Bruce's second strike. Richard's face showed his surprise. He skipped forward and shoved Bruce hard enough to send him stumbling back. An illegal move. Before Bruce could recover his balance, Richard aimed a vicious kick at his knee. Pain exploded through Bruce. He clenched his teeth in an attempt not to cry out, but his legs still gave way, and he nearly fell. He caught himself at the last second, stumbling. Bruce's dark hair fell across his forehead as he glared at his opponent. This wasn't a move learned from their coach. Their strikes turned faster and more frequent. Richard had a weight and height advantage over Bruce, but he was slower, and Bruce could see him starting to tire. Bruce seized the moment to strike Richard twice in rapid succession against his side. The boy doubled over with a grunt. As Bruce swung at him, Richard grabbed Bruce's wrist and twisted his arm around in one gesture, flinging Bruce forward towards the edge of the ring. Bruce stumbled, but this time he was ready. He used his momentum to swing back around, striking Richard hard in the stomach. Richard doubled over and held a hand up, a silent signal to pause. Bruce hesitated, breathing heavily, pain lancing up and down his body. He lowered his fists. The instant he did, Richard struck. His first connect his fist connected with Bruce's chin. Stars burst in his vision. The next thing he knew, he was lying on the floor of the ring with his goggles removed, staring up at his coach's concerned face as the man helped him up into a sitting position. When head coach returned to the room, coach frowned, nodding for them to step out of the ring. Break it up, both of you. He gave them pointed looks. You two used to spar so well. Now I can't leave you boys alone for a few minutes before you try to kill each other. Bruce winced, touching his swelling jaw gingerly as Coach left to get an ice pack. He glared at Richard. Only way you win these days is by cheating, isn't it? Poor Bruce Wayne. Nobody treats him fair. Richard returned his cold look before turning away. Somehow it was worse than the physical pain Bruce felt. In the real world, there's no such thing as cheating, is there? Just life. I'll begin chapter 7. I'll see how far I get. Give me a second. Oh. Oh. What happened to you? Draken asked Bruce when she saw him in the Arkham cafeteria that weekend. Her eyes went straight to the deep purple bruise staining Bruce's jaw. Bruce didn't reply right away as he took a seat across from her with his lunch tray. The rest of the week had blurred mercifully by, full of finals and yearbooks and graduation preparations. Bruce was glad for it all, a welcome distraction from his spar with Richard. He had even relieved to be here at Arkham on a Saturday. It always looks worse when it's healing, he finally said to the detective. I'll be fine. She didn't pry further to Bruce's relief. Instead, she went back to her food. Hope you're still having a miserable time here, Wayne, she said. Almost as miserable as you, he replied. That's so. She chuckled once. Then you've got it pretty bad. Bruce watched the detective for a moment. Her nails were perfectly unchipped. Still the same nude brown polish to match the tone of her hands. She was careful about the way she ate. He noticed as she was about her appearance, the way she spread her food, the way she arranged her napkin in a perfect square beside her plate so that the edges ran exactly parallel to the table. No wonder she'd become a detective, absorbed in the details of things. In spite of himself, he liked her presence here. At least she lacked any interest in nonsense and had no desire to taunt him. In fact, if Bruce hadn't come over to talk to her, she would probably avoid him for the entire duration of his summer probation. Oh. Bruce's thoughts wandered back to the girl in Arkham's basement level. He had passed through the hall several times since they had first locked eyes, although her cell was always filled with a team of detectives and police, including Draken, who spent the sessions rubbing her neck in frustration as the girl remained silent. Bruce had to marvel at the girl's stubbornness. She didn't even bother looking at her interrogators. She stared straight ahead, as if not even aware that they were there. There was a different folded napkin in her hand each time, a swan, a boat, a star. He always found himself lingering there, waiting for her to twist her wrist and transform the paper into something else, something more dangerous. Draken caught him studying her. What do you want, Wayne? You look like a question's about to pop right out of your mouth. I saw you and your team down in the basement level twice last week. What's the story behind that girl in the last cell? Draken raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow at him. This place boring you enough to make you nosy? Just wondering, Bruce added, stirring his mashed potatoes in an attempt to make them creamier. It's hard to miss the spectacle. Draken put her fork down and massaged her forehead. Whatever the reason, Bruce thought the interrogation was clearly a sore point for her. The girl, she's in there for a good reason, believe me. What we discuss with her is none of your business. Bruce looked at his own food, picking his next words carefully. It didn't seem like much of a discussion, Detective. Excuse me? He casually cut himself another piece of meat. With all due respect, I've only seen you and the other officers asking her questions. She doesn't ever seem to respond. Just by the expression that crossed Draken's face, Bruce knew the answer. The girl had never responded to anyone's questions. She probably stared off into space the entire time they questioned her, pretending that they weren't even there, folding her bits of origami. He was surprised they didn't ball up her creations in frustration. Draken muttered a curse. The Night Walkers give us an endless string of cases. Night Walkers. Bruce leaned forward. What do they want? Draken shrugged. You've seen their symbol, right? The coin in flames, usually spray painted on a wall. They're a massive network of thieves and killers. But they go after the rich. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. They use it to fund their operations. Operations? So far, we've targeted assassinations, bombing factories, terrorizing the city. They see themselves in a Robin Hood light, however twisted, and like to frame that their tactics are taking from the rich and giving to the poor, although all they've really given the poor in this city is a more dangerous place to live. Taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Bruce couldn't help uttering a chuckle at that. Draken eyed him. What? It's just that people always seem to conveniently forget to follow through on the second half. Draken pulled down her red rimmed glasses to look at Bruce over the top. Philosophical, she said, sounding slightly amused. Then she waved her hand once. It's nice of you to ask, Wayne, she said as she stood up and pulled her tan coat off the back of the back of her chair. Oh my God, I'm sorry. But you're here on probation, not detective duty. Let's work on getting you out of this place, not more entangled in its webs. When Bruce headed down to the basement level after lunch, one of the lights in the corridor was flickering in an unsettling rhythm. It was trembling. It cast a trembling glow the walls, making the hall seem surreal, as if it might blink out of existence if he shut his eye. A couple of the cells were empty while several of the remaining inmates were napping, although